Res. 76, a resolution removing a member of Congress from the Committee on Foreign Affairs. Until the 117th Congress, it was tradition in the House of Representatives for the majority and the minority to respect the rights of each party to place their own members on committees as they saw fit. Unfortunately, in the last Congress, Democrats decided to end that tradition and established a new precedent, allowing the entire House to act to remove a member from his or her committee assignments. As such, we're following this precedent, and we're moving forward today with this resolution. I now yield to our ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hate to say I told you so. I really do. But just yesterday, I proposed an amendment to the committee rules that would require us to vote before considering an emergency measure. And now I see why this majority voted down that amendment. House Republican leaders clearly intend to pick up exactly where the last Republican majority left off, abusing their power to call emergency meetings and ignoring real issues that need urgent attention. I mean, this is the first emergency that popped up in this committee? I mean, really? The majority is invoking emergency procedures to meet on removing Representative Omar from a committee she doesn't even sit on yet. I mean, what's the emergency? It's not like, you know, where one member was threatening the life of another member. I mean, maybe we can understand an emergency meeting on that, but that's not what this is. I mean, give me a break. What's the next emergency? An emergency meeting to tell Donald Trump how much you miss him? It's clear to me what this is all about. Retaliation, vengeance, and spite. It's about putting extremist political stunts over solving actual problems facing the American people. I mean, Republicans told everyone who would listen that their top priority in the new majority would be fighting inflation. We are 15 closed rules later, and we have seen nothing before this committee or on the floor that would reduce inflation. This is their emergency, not inflation, not safer communities, not better jobs. This isn't an emergency. It's an embarrassment. And of course, on top of the absurd use of emergency procedures, the text of this resolution just became available an hour ago. Now, for all the rhetoric about 72 hours and giving everyone time to read bills and to understand the meaning of the bills, it's clear that's all it was, rhetoric. Just last week, our colleague, Mr. Roy, told reporters that it better be, and I quote, a damn good thing like, you know, a 9/11 attack or something to give members less than 72 hours to read a bill. So my question is, did I miss a breaking news alert? And for the record, Congresswoman Omar is a good member of Congress. She fights hard for her district and for her values. She has apologized for the things she said. She has said she wants to be an ally in the fight against anti-Semitism. She even voted to condemn anti-Semitism. Every Democrat did, by the way. You know who voted no on that resolution? Dr. Burgess, Mr. Massey, and Mr. Roy. Let that sink in. And by the way, you know what Congressman Omar hasn't done? She's never posted a video pretending to kill another member of Congress. She never threatened to kill the Speaker of the House of Representatives. She never had dinner with neo-Nazis like Nick Fuentes and anti-Semites like Kanye West. She's never spoken at a white supremacy rally. She's never said that she would have won January 6th because she would have been armed. Those are all things that folks on your side of the aisle have done. Should they all be removed from their committees? So please spare us the phony comparisons and lectures about anti-Semitism. We have a long list of things that Republican members have said and done, and they've never apologized for. And I'm happy to go into great detail, even more than I've done so. And so we are happy to explore that list in detail during this hearing. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank my friend. I reminded him, I warned him some time ago, last year, as a matter of fact, that this, or 2 years ago, this might come back, and it has. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman Guest and Ranking Member Weil, to the witness table. Chairman Guest, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appear before the Rules Committee today pursuant to a process put in place by House Democrats in the 117th Congress. At the time, I served on House Ethics. Today, I'm the chairman of that committee. On February 4, 2021, I publicly warned of the dangerous precedent set by the Speaker as she put in place a process to remove a Republican member from her committees. A resolution was offered removing a Republican member from her committees based on Clause 1, House Rule 13, and referred to the House Ethics Committee. Speaker Pelosi's process bypassed any Ethics Committee involvement and brought the resolution directly to the floor for a vote. I and many of my Republicans warned that this majority's veto over a minority party's committee appointment dangerously removed important rights of the minority party. Many Republicans warned that a Republican majority would follow this new Democrat roadmap and put some of their members' committee assignments at risk. Today, House Resolution 76, as to Representative Ilhan Omar, details 6 statements she made as a sitting member of Congress that under the totality of the circumstances disqualify her from serving on the Committee on Foreign Affairs. We are not saying that Representative Omar cannot serve on any committees. We're simply saying that she cannot serve on a committee that receives classified briefings and is responsible for maintaining international diplomacy. The Committee on Foreign Affairs is a panel viewed by nations around the world as speaking for Congress on matters of international importance and national security. All members, both Republicans and Democrats alike, who seek to serve on foreign affairs should be held to an equal standard of conduct due to the international sensitivities and national security concerns under the jurisdiction of the committee. As such, House Resolution 76, citing Clause 1, House Rule 13, has been offered to remove Representative Omar from the Committee on Foreign Affairs. Following Speaker Pelosi's process, the resolution was referred to the House Ethics Committee. Also following Speaker Pelosi's process, the issue will bypass the Ethics Committee and the resolution will be brought to the House floor for a vote. Thank you, and I yield back.
Committee. I'm disappointed because my colleagues in the majority are choosing as one of their very first exercises of authority this Congress to pursue vengeance over governance. Governance, true good faith governance, would be to allow this resolution, which has been referred to the Ethics Committee, to proceed through the committee's regular process. The Ethics Committee is charged with determining whether a member's behavior violates the Code of Official Conduct and, when warranted by a violation, recommending that the House adopt sanctions or restrict certain privileges like service on committees. Yet the majority is seeking to advance this resolution before the Ethics Committee has even adopted its rules or convened for the first time this Congress. I would note that the majority's members of the Ethics Committee were just announced yesterday. The committee has not debated this measure. Chairman Guest and I have not had a single conversation about this matter. The majority has involved the Ethics Committee in this resolution only to immediately bypass the committee and its proper functioning. The resolution notes that any member reserves the right to bring a case before the Committee on Ethics as grounds for an appeal to the Speaker for reconsideration of a committee removal decision, but that statement is incorrect, and it is not due process. Once the full House votes to strip a member of a right or privilege, only the full House can restore that right or privilege. Allowing Representative Omar to appeal to the Ethics Committee after the House has already voted to deny her a seat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee would be nonsensical, and it would be defective process. It violates how the Ethics Committee has operated ever since its creation as a standing committee of the House in 1967. First, the committee recommends a sanction after allowing the member to present evidence and make their case, and then the House votes on whether to adopt that sanction. And how could the Ethics Committee impartially consider Representative Omar's appeal if its leadership has first been asked to control time and manage debate on the resolution that imposes the sanction being appealed? House Resolution 76 violates the spirit of how this very unique Ethics Committee, the House's only evenly divided, truly bipartisan standing committee, operates. This resolution uses an approach that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have previously and loudly criticized. And yet those same colleagues eagerly embrace that very approach now that they wield the gavels. House Resolution 76 is about partisanship, not principle. If it were about principle, if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were truly interested in purging hateful rhetoric from the halls of the House, if they genuinely believe that members should be disqualified from committees because of their past statements invoking stereotypes about religious or ethnic groups, then they should be acting to similarly disqualify many other of our colleagues from their committee assignments. And I say that with sorrow. Multiple members who are on record uttering anti-Semitic or racist comments that are unbecoming of a House member. All of these members who are in the majority have been rewarded with committee positions this Congress. Some even hold leadership positions in the Republican conference. But where are the efforts to sanction those members for their troubling expressions of hatred? Where is the outrage and condemnation? The silence is deafening. The inaction is revealing. This is about payback. It's not about process. And I believe it's wholly transparent for what it is, and I firmly oppose its passage.
Thank you both for your comments. Chair has no questions at this time, and I recognize Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to thank our witnesses for being here this evening. I know it's late, and I know the day's been long. I want to associate myself with the comments made by the chairman of the committee that you were warned. You were warned in the last Congress. If you go down this road, at some point, you will have to face the consequences of the majority changing. And that's exactly what's happening. As far as the sense of Congress on anti-Semitism, I think the concern was in the last Congress it had been watered down so much. It truly was a sort of a both sidesism complaint. It also contained passages on Islamophobia as well as anti-Semitism, and there were many members, myself included, who felt that that watering down process was not necessary and in fact harmful to the overall process. So I appreciate the witnesses being here this evening. I won't prolong this discussion. You were warned when you went down this road in the last Congress, and I will share with you, I do hope it ends here, but that is not a surprise that we are here. And I'll yield back to the chairman.
members recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me be clear about the precedent here. I mean, the standard that was set when we moved to remove Representative Green and Gosar from their committees, it was a pretty low bar. And the bar was very clear. If you threaten to kill another member of Congress, you threaten to do harm to another member of Congress, then you lose the privilege of being on a committee. That was it. And I think it's a pretty low bar. Is it a high bar, I guess? Really? That's it. That was it. That's what prompted that. And let me ask you, let me ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement released today by Representative Spartz about this resolution. And
Without objection.
yeah, and she, along with and Representative Gates, is expressing similar sentiments about this resolution. But the statement touts due process language that was supposedly added to the resolution. I mean, I have to admit, I'm completely lost. There is nothing in this resolution that provides due process. Nothing. As we all know, the only part of a resolution that has any actual force is the resolve clause. All that clause says is that Representative Omar is removed from the Committee on Foreign Affairs. That is it. What is in the resolution are some vague thoughts about how an appeal process could work. It opines that Representative Omar could go to the Ethics Committee after being removed and, quote, bring a case, end quote. Of course, that's not how any of this works. And no American should think that would make any sense anyway, going to a jury after being convicted and penalized? And no member of Congress should think anything new is being created here. But even if it did make sense, the resolution theorizes that such a, quote, appeal would be to the Speaker, which makes even less sense. Anyone who has been here longer than 5 minutes knows the House elects members to committees, not the Speaker. Frankly, the notion that this resolution has any due process is simply bullshit, to be in plain English. So, Ranking Member Wild, would this resolution set up any way for the Ethics Committee to return Representative Omar to the Foreign Affairs Committee?
No, it does not.
I mean, Chairman Guest, do you disagree with that?
This is not my resolution. I didn't draft it. The resolution does something that we didn't see in the Marjorie Taylor Greene resolution. It does offer some sort of avenue if the Speaker were, if the House were to remove Ms. Omar, for her to go to the Ethics Committee, and then the Ethics Committee could then refer it to the Speaker, for the Speaker to be able to be the final arbitrator, if you will.
Yeah.
I've not seen this process used before, but there is a process that is in the resolution.
This doesn't set up a process. This talks about a potential process. And again, I'll remind you that the Speaker doesn't elect members to committee. The House does. I mean, that's why when we all nominate our candidates for different committees, it goes before the full House. That's the way this works. That's the way this works. Chairman Guest, in January 2019, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene liked a comment on social media that advocated a bullet to the head of then Speaker Pelosi. In a video, Ms. Greene claims that then Speaker Pelosi is guilty of treason. Ms. Greene then says, quote, "It's a crime punishable by death is what treason is. Nancy Pelosi is guilty of treason." I assume you don't agree with those comments.
Do I agree that she made those comments?
No,
Or do I agree with the spirit of those
with the
comments?
spirit-
I do not agree with the spirit of those
Yeah, all
comments.
right.
That is
All right,
correct.
so I mean, I think we were all saying that they're not appropriate, right?
Yes.
Does it disqualify her from serving on the Homeland Security Committee?
Well, that's not a decision for me to make.
But
I'm not the arbitrator
No, but-
of who
but-
serves on what committee.
But you're making a decision about
And if you
represent-
wish to bring a resolution disqualifying
No,
her,
I'm just-
then you have the ability to do so.
I'm just, you just gave a statement about how, because of remarks that Representative Omar made, which she apologized for, that she is not qualified to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I think Homeland Security is a pretty important committee.
I'm here
and
to
some-
argue the process about how this legislation should go forward. I'm not here to opine about whether or not I agree with statements that Ms. Omar made, that Ms. Greene made,
but with
Mr. Gosar. That is not why I'm
but with
before this
respect,
committee today.
Do you support this resolution?
Yes, I wouldn't
Okay,
be
all
here
right.
if I did not
And
support
are you
it.
bringing this resolution before the Rules Committee?
I am, yes.
Okay, so I'm finding it hard to follow that on one hand, you're supporting this resolution, on the other hand, you're trying to say you have nothing to do with the resolution. The bottom line is you are supporting a resolution to remove Representative Omar from a committee because of statements she made that she has apologized for. Now, I'm just
The
read...
totality of the circumstances. Yes.
Let me go on. In a Facebook post from April 2018, Representative Greene wrote conspiratorially about the Iran deal negotiated by former President Obama. A commentator asked Greene, now, I'm quoting now do we get to hang them, meaning H and O, end of quote, referring to Obama and Hillary Clinton. Greene responded, and I quote, "Stage is being set, players are being put in place, we must be patient, this must be done perfectly, or liberal judges will let them off," end quote. Does that give you any pause as to whether someone who says those things should be on the Homeland Security Committee?
Again, I'm not here and not going to opine about Ms. Greene and what committees that she should serve or should not serve on.
Yeah, this bill, you're bringing this bill to the floor, you have an opinion on one member, but you don't have an opinion on the other. Let me continue. In 2019, mere months before announcing her candidacy, Ms. Greene posted a video on social media recruiting attendees for the, quote, Fund the Wall march in Washington. She told her followers, and I quote, "Protest against this out-of-control, tyrannical, insane federal government of ours. They are nothing, and they should fear us. Every single one of them. They should fear us. They should be cowering in fear. And you know what? If you show up in big numbers on February 23rd, oh, I promise you, they'll be struck with fear on the inside. All the Obama holdovers and the Hillary Clinton holdovers, when we rise up, we can end all of this. We can end it. We can do it peacefully. We can, I hope. We don't have to do it the other way. I hope not. But we should feel like we will if we have to, because we are the American people. She's also liked comments about executing FBI agents. Again, does that give you any pause about her being on the Homeland Security Committee?
Again, I'm not here to opine, to agree or disagree with any statements that she may have previously made, any comments that she may have liked. I'm here to talk about the process that has been set forth by previous Congress as to how this resolution should go forward.
Well, 3 years ago, 17 people were murdered at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. A year later, Mrs. Green claimed without evidence that the school shootings were a convenient means of pushing for stricter gun laws. At the time, she said, quote, "I'm told Nancy Pelosi tells Hillary Clinton several times a month that we need another school shooting in order to persuade the public to want strict gun control," end of quote. I will also add, she appeared at a white supremacy rally with Nick Fuentes. You know who Nick Fuentes is by any chance?
No, I've never met him personally, but I know that.
You know, a white supremacist who spouts anti-Semitic comments, who denies the Holocaust happened. She shook his hand at this event. I say all of this because, again, I think that the bar that was set before was pretty clear. If you threaten other members of Congress, you don't have the privilege of being on a committee. So when people talk about precedent opening the door, I mean, that was the bar that was set. And that you are here with a resolution, and again, I don't want to put you in the spot because it seems that there's been a pattern today of committee chairs coming before us to bring us resolutions that they had nothing to do in terms of writing, but they're being forced to bring them before the Rules Committee because it's been referred to your committee. I mean, this is beyond the pale here, and it's not about the example is not the Marjorie Taylor Greene GOSAR example. I can go through a whole list of GOSAR statements too, as well, that are equally disturbing. Action was taken against them because they threatened violence against other members in this chamber. I mean, there ought to be a line somewhere, and that was the line that was drawn. And if you're going to start drawing the line in different ways, you know what? I mean, I've just read to you just a tiny bit of what one of your colleagues has said here. And to be honest with you, it's sickening. It's disgusting. And yet she's going to be on Homeland Security. You know, I'm more worried about someone who thinks like that on Homeland Security, who, by the way, was saying that if she was there on January 6th, she would have been armed and they would have won. I'm more worried about having someone like that, who thinks like that, on the Homeland Security Committee than, quite frankly, any of the stuff that you're bringing up here today about Representative Omar. And so let's be clear what's going on here. As I said at the beginning, this is not about, the Democrats set the precedent. This is about vengeance. This is about spite. This is about politics. And, to come here in an emergency meeting, before she's even been put on the committee, by the way, is just astounding to me with all that is going on in this country right now, with all the challenges that we have. And, I don't know, whatever. I mean, I didn't expect much from this new majority, but I'll tell you, I mean, you're much worse than I thought you could be. And this is proof positive. Well, it's what I believe. I'm talking about Republicans in general. I'm not mentioning him by name. You know what? It is necessary, because this is outrageous. And we have real problems in this country, and this is what you're doing? I'm sorry. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I've got a lot of respect for the ranking member, of course, but I just have to add some distinguishing factors here. When it comes to Marjorie Taylor Greene, we got to remember, she said those statements before she was elected. And then, of course,
I mean, the statement that she just made about that if on January 6th, that if people, if they were armed, if she was leading it and they were armed, that she would have won. That was not. That was.
I'll give you that.
I mean,
not
she's
that
on
one,
Homeland Security.
But every other statement you referenced was before she was elected.
That was after she was censured.
It was before she was elected.
Not January 6th. She made this after. She's made this a recent statement.
I'll give you that one. But every other statement that you referenced was made before she was actually elected.
The Nick Fuentes thing was a couple of months ago. A well-known white supremacist, anti-Semite, who denies that the Holocaust existed.
So another distinguishing factor here is this,
all right.
is that, here's another distinguishing factor. Marjorie Taylor Greene went to the floor and apologized in front of all of us for those statements, and she said that she denounced those statements. There's been no such statement from Ms. Omar. In fact, she's doubled down repeatedly on these statements, and I can go through it. Additionally, the inflammatory remarks, as if the inflammatory remarks are just from one side. I literally have a stack of papers that are just inflammatory remarks that I could go down with members from my friends across the aisle. I'm not going to do that, but to say that we're the only ones that have inflammatory statements, it's just not accurate. And if we have the standard where if you say an inflammatory remark, you get kicked off the committee, I'll go through all these statements that Democrats have made in the last Congress, and we can decide if they should be kicked off committee or not.
Well, the gentleman yield just one second.
Of course.
Yeah, I didn't say that people should be kicked off for inflammatory statements. A lot of people say things that we consider inflammatory. It is about promoting violence that I have a problem with. And by the way, Representative Omar has apologized for one of the comments that caused a great deal of concern. And Representative Greene, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't apologized for being at a white supremacist convention with a well-known anti-Semite. So I hear you. And again, this is about threatening violence. That was the standard. And I will tell you, if a Democratic member threatened violence against you or anybody here, I would like to think that we would rise to the occasion and do the same.
So I actually have examples of that. I was going to skip over them, but I'll run through a few. Okay, so Chairwoman Maxine Waters in 2018 said, and I quote, "Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore anywhere. We've got to get the children connected to their parents." That was at the time, Chairwoman Waters. To me, that's a call to violence. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, December 2nd, 2020, tweeted, "The whole point of protesting is to make people feel uncomfortable. To folks who claim protest demands make others uncomfortable, that's the point."
So,
to me, that's a call to violence.
well, Jimmy, you.
Yeah.
So, Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, we should have guns, and if we did, we would win on January 6th, is not violence. But Maxine Waters screaming at somebody in a restaurant to you is. I mean, we have a very different sense, of where that line is, to be honest with you.
Joe Biden, 2018, University of Miami, said to a heckler, they asked me, would I like to debate this gentleman? I said no. I said, if I were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. To me, that's a call to violence. Maxine Waters, again, let me see the date on this, 2017, I will go and take Trump out tonight. Again, I've got a stack of inflammatory remarks
And
made by
I just
Democrats.
began.
What's that?
I have a list as well. I just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I'm happy to read through all the anti-Semitic comments, all the anti-Muslim comments, all the threats of violence. We could be here all night. I'm happy to do it.
No, I show deference to the ranking member. I respect him. I consider you a friend. Let's talk about the anti-Semitic remarks and just put this in context. Let's hone in on what Ms. Omar has said exactly. And this shows a pattern of what she has said, just not a one-off statement. 2019, she tweeted that support for Israel by Congress is, and I quote, all about the Benjamin's baby. To me, clearly that's an anti-Semitic trope. You cannot argue that's not an anti-Semitic trope. February 11th, 2019, she doubled down on her stance at a forum in Washington, D.C. Again, Marjorie Taylor Greene apologized for her statement. She said, and I quote, "I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it's okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country." Again, alluding to a trope where Jews have dual loyalty. You can't read that any other way. And I'm not the only one. Chairman Engel, a Democrat, the chairman at the time of Foreign Affairs, I was on it at the time, he said, and I quote Chairman Engel, "It's unacceptable and deeply offensive to call into question the loyalty of fellow American citizens because of their political views, including support for the U.S.-Israeli relationship. We all take the same oath. Worse, Representative Omar's comments leveled that charge by invoking a vile anti-Semitic slur." That was the Democratic chairman at the time. That's just not me saying that. Okay, September 11th. I'm sorry, in March 29, about September 11th, Representative Omar said, and I quote, "Some people did something," clearly minimizing the most heinous terrorist attack, the most heinous attack on this soil ever. Some people did something. Completely unacceptable. 2021, a few months before the death of 13 service members during the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, Representative Omar compared service members of the U.S. and IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, to terrorist groups of Hamas and the Taliban, somehow insinuating that there's a moral equivalency between a terrorist group, Hamas, another terrorist group, the Taliban, and the IDF and the U.S. Armed Services. Completely unacceptable. June 2021, she tweeted, "We have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban." Again, doubling down on the equivalence between the United States, Israel, and terrorist organizations. Then, in May of 2010, when Israel was responding to rocket attacks from Hamas, in a defensive manner, I might say, she said, "We need accountability for every war crime committed, and we need to stop underwriting crimes against humanity while doing nothing to end the occupation." Again, insinuating that the Israelis are occupying Israel, the only Jewish state in the world. So look, I have zero problems removing Representative Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee. She has a pattern of anti-Semitic comments that pull from the worst kind of, most vile anti-Semitic tropes there are. We are actually showing restraint by only removing her from Foreign Affairs. If she were if the roles were reversed, we know exactly what the Democrats would do. You would remove her from all her committees, no questions asked. We're simply removing her from Foreign Affairs, which I think that is incredibly generous. But
With the chairman,
absolutely.
just for a brief colloquy, I presume you wouldn't call what you all are doing a partisan power grab. Is that fair to say? You don't believe that to be true?
I'm characterizing this, look, the rules were changed last Congress where never before in the history of Congress could the manager of the other baseball team pick the lineup of the team's baseball team.
Correct.
And in essence, that's what the Democratic leadership did. They said that we can't sit our own members. But now, here's the difference, and I'll yield back. The difference is that we're now in the majority. The rules were changed by your party. We're now just playing by those rules.
I hear you. I guess what I'm saying is 2 years ago, you, Mr. Reschenthaler, called what House Democrats did a partisan power grab. That's what you identified this exact, almost verbatim resolution. You don't feel that way today. Now, because it's part of the precedent, and so therefore it's no longer a partisan power grab. It has evolved into just a normal rule of the business. Is that, I'm not.
Yeah. No. It's a fair question. I think that too often Republicans try to take the proverbial high road when Democrats have changed the rules. I didn't agree with removing Marjorie Taylor Greene. I did not agree with removing Doc Gosar. However, with that said, because the rules have been changed by your party, I'm going to now play by your rules.
I hear you.
And we're in the majority, so we can remove her. And again, if it were up to me, we would be going even further, given this past of given the anti-Semitic remarks.
And I'm not characterizing your decision. I'm just simply saying I don't know how it can be a partisan power grab 2 years ago, but no longer be a partisan power grab today.
The partisan power grab was changing the rules and the precedent in the House.
But it's not a partisan power grab to adhere to the new rule that you believed was a partisan power grab when
Hey.
it was adopted. I mean, I guess
Hey,
I'm just trying to
Your,
understand.
hey, your
'Cause I-
party,
you know, I
your
hear
party
you.
changed the rules. We're just now playing by them. So this is how it's going to be. You decided that
But you'll
that
understand
the
why I would
opposition
call it a
party.
partisan power grab if that's the case. If,
You,
I mean,
you can,
you know,
yeah, you can characterize it however you want. I would still say that your party changed the rules. We will now play by those rules, and Ilhan Omar will not be seated on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I think that's incredibly generous. With that, I yield back.
Thank you.
You let me do a second?
I'm sorry, yes, I'm going to yield first to the ranking member.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you want to play by our rules, that's fine. If a member threatens violence against another member, then you can, like Marjorie Taylor Greene did, like Paul Gosar did, then you can remove somebody from committee. But let me just say one thing. I just find it really stunning to me that you have no problem with Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Homeland Security Committee after last month, and she didn't apologize for this. She, referring about January 6th, said that if I were there, I would have been armed and we would have won. Won what? It was an insurrection. People were injured. 140 Capitol Police officers were injured. People died as a result of what happened that day. Staff were traumatized. The country was traumatized. It was an attempt to overthrow a legitimate election. And yet, you are totally fine with her on the Homeland Security, defending our homeland when she's basically siding with the people who attacked this building and tried to kill people in this building. That I don't get.
With the ranking member yield.
Yeah, you have the time. Yeah, you can. Yeah, if she'll yield to you, I'll.
Thanks,
yield
I
to you.
appreciate it. Look, we can play this game all day talking about.
It's not a game.
No.
But there was violence in the summer of 2020, real violence. Cities were burning, and you had numerous Democrats basically cheering it on. So why is it different when Representative Ocasio-Cortez starts talking about making people feel uncomfortable, ratcheting up the violence? What's the difference between that and Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments? I'll read you the quote.
I like you a lot. I'm
Likewise.
just stunned by this conversation, and that you don't see, the difference here, or by the fact that somebody who would say that. By the way, there's a pattern of this stuff. Somebody who would say that you all feel comfortable putting on the Homeland Security Committee. I mean, I guess I know why, because the Speaker needed votes. And so lots of promises were made. But boy, that's a pretty dangerous promise that was made. I think it makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, not just on this side of the aisle, but I think a lot of Republicans feel uncomfortable with that choice as well. Thank you.
So reclaiming my time, I think one of the areas where we've seen that this resolution has made even Republicans queasy is we just saw a tweet from Representative Spartz saying she's supporting the measure because due process was added into the resolution and that there's now some kind of due process here. Representative Wild, can you talk about that? How is there due process?
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to get back to the process part of this. I'll leave it to the members of the committee to debate it and argue it, but I do want to get some factual points in. And I just want to start by saying that I happen to be a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee as well as the Ethics Committee, just coincidentally. And I also happen to be Jewish, and I am somebody who was personally offended by Representative Omar's comments. So I'm saying that just so you can evaluate the context of my remarks to this body. The resolution, as I believe the ranking member pointed out, the only binding part of this resolution is the part that says resolved that the following named member be and hereby is removed from the following standing committee of the House of Representatives, Committee on Foreign Affairs, Ms. Omar. It does not provide any appeal process. There are a lot of whereas clauses, and there are a lot of lawyers in the room who presumably know that whereas clauses don't really mean much of anything. So they might be nice dressing, but it's not part of the process. So not only does this resolution not include a process for appeal, but the rules of the Ethics Committee do not permit a process for appeal from a full vote of the House to remove a member from a committee. I also think that it's worthy of pointing out that there have been several references about what has been done in a prior Congress, specifically, I think the 117th was what was being referred to. I don't believe that's justification for moving forward on something in the 118th that is patently violative of a process that we have in place. I would point out that Mr. Guest was not a ranking member or chair of ethics at the time those members were removed from their committees, nor was I a ranking member or chair. So what is happening now, I think, should be viewed as moving forward, not backward. I'm reminded, as some people were speaking, of my parents' admonition that two wrongs don't make a right. So for those who think that it was wrong to remove those members from committees and to somehow justify the removal of Ms. Omar because of what's happened before, I don't think is proper process also. The other thing that I think is really important to point out is that the comments made by Ms. Omar do fall into the category of opinion. They didn't call for action. And in this very room, we see multiple people who are disagreeing on matters of opinion. We see it every single day on the floor of the House. We see it every single day in our committees. That's kind of what we do here. And just because I or somebody else might find a fellow representative's opinions to be offensive should not be the basis for taking action for removal from a committee, as opposed to, and I'm not going to go through what those comments were, they've already been addressed by members who have advocated action, not opinion. And finally, I do just want to point out, for those of you who may not know, that Ms. Omar actually did suffer repercussions as a result of her comments. She was, and I was a member of Foreign Affairs at the time, she was as well. She was slated to become vice chair of, when we were in the majority, of the Africa Subcommittee, and that was taken away from her by then Committee Chairman Elliot Engel, with the assent of the chair of the Africa Subcommittee, who was then Karen Bass. And I think that's an important note to make, because to me, that is where this kind of action needs to be taken. If something that a member does is patently offensive to the work of the committee and what the committee's mission is, it seems to me that that's something that should be dealt with within the committee, as it was with Ms. Omar back then, rather than doing a blanket removal of somebody for their stated opinions. So with that, I hope, I don't know that I've answered any questions, but I hope I have, because I do think that that reflects very much. And I just need to say one more thing. I think it was my colleague from Pennsylvania, Mr. Reschenthaler, who made the comment that the Democrats changed the rules. Well, the reality is that the rules change with every Congress, particularly when we shift which party is in majority, and Republicans have changed rules themselves. So I would really urge this body not to pass this, and to recognize that we perhaps should all take the higher road and not seek punitive actions against members based on their opinions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You know, we spent 2 hours earlier today having sort of a middle school level salon about socialism, and now we're back to waste what will probably be another couple hours to make another pointless political statement to appease radical right members of the House Republican caucus. House Republicans have so much trouble governing with their fractured majority, even electing a speaker, that they are using their slim control of the House to sow division and create chaos and dysfunction. This bill does nothing to address inflation or crime or the issues that American families actually care about. As the chairman and other members across the aisle have tacitly acknowledged, this resolution is retaliation for the removal of 2 Republican members from their committees in the last Congress after they threatened violence against other members of Congress and the President of the United States. But I would note that those removals occurred with bipartisan support only after Republican leadership refused to take any action. And as we just heard, that has not been the same case with respect to Representative Omar. This resolution that we're looking at cites a 2019 statement by the former chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Elliot Engel, criticizing statements Representative Omar made. The resolution cites those statements to suggest that he believes she shouldn't serve on the committee, and as we've just heard, that was not true. He did not seek her removal from the committee, although she did suffer other forms of limitation. But what is also deeply troubling is this seems to occur as part of a pattern of demonizing female members of Congress, and particularly women of color serving in Congress, in order to sow division and distract from the fact that there apparently is no plan or consensus among our colleagues across the aisle to actually serve the American people. We're less than a month into the 118th Congress, and we're not hearing anything about actually delivering on campaign rhetoric or dealing with the issues facing the American people. This is a deeply unserious measure, and I strongly oppose the resolution. Thank you.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I would like to associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Reschenthaler. I think you did a very good job of putting things in perspective. But, you know, and I think we talk about the precedent that's set, and we are a body of precedent. I mean, you know, there's a book like this thick that we deal with precedents. And so this precedent was set. This was set. This was, and I think Mr. Cole said earlier, or Chair Cole, excuse me, said earlier that the majority at that time was warned and said, you are setting a dangerous precedent. And so just like to point that out. But Ms. Wild, I just wanted to ask, I think, as I recall in your statement, you argued that it should have gone to ethics, that this should have been referred to the Ethics Committee. Is that, did I hear you correctly?
What I referred to is the process that the Ethics Committee has for taking complaints about members' conduct, doing an investigation, and when warranted by the violation, recommending that the House adopt sanctions or restrict certain privileges, including service on committees. So, yes, I do believe this is something that should go through the Ethics Committee.
So the other cases should not have gone through
Well,
ethics?
that's exactly why I pointed out that I
Okay.
was neither ranking member nor chair, nor was Mr. Guest, and I'm a believer in following the rules that I believe exist. And I think this is something that should go through the Ethics Committee.
So you disagreed with the majority, the former majority doing it the way they handled it last year or the year before?
I wasn't asked to opine on it. I was on ethics, but I wasn't in a position to be asked
Or
or
as a
to
member, you
render an opinion.
you
Well,
couldn't have pointed that out to them?
To whom?
To the majority who was pushing it through the way that we
I had
are-
many
are living it
conversations
now.
with many members when we were in the majority about those particular votes.
Okay, I just wanted to be understand if you were being consistent, because if you're arguing now it should be an ethics committee issue, and in the 117th it shouldn't have been, but I just wanted to make that clear, because we did send it, but the precedent was set that this is the way by the former majority, that this is the way it's handled. And, you know, with that, I will yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I love serving on the Rules Committee. Great start to the year so far. I've missed a meeting or two in my short time on the committee, as Ms. Fishbach knows. The reason why, in all seriousness, the reason why I like serving on the Rules Committee is it's one of the few committees in the Congress, and I tell this to others, where the cynicism that one might have about this place can occasionally be washed away. And I think, at least the returning members will remember a moment last year when then-ranking member Cole had voted a certain way on a particular resolution and then had changed his vote after comments I had made in this committee, which really moved me and convinced me that there are still occasions in the Congress where we can have reasonable conversations about matters of principle and try to find common ground. I say that as a precursor because I don't fault my colleague, my good friend from Pennsylvania, for the position he's taking and the position he's articulating. where I find concern is the indignation that I hear from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And that is to say, every member on the other side of the aisle that served in the last Congress, I'm not going to read through the statements. My staff pulled them all up, the statements from you, Mr. Roy, and adjourning on the floor when Ms. Taylor Greene was removed from her committees and, calling it a unilateral targeting of a member. I guess I am now reading the statements from memory. But in any event, my point is not to regale this committee with all of the ways in which my colleagues on the other side of the aisle warned in very aggressive language about the resolution to remove members from committees last Congress, and talked about it being a partisan power grab and dangerous and unprecedented, and that it would ruin the body. And I understand my colleague from Pennsylvania's point that as a result of those steps, and of course, you've heard the ranking member, I think, articulate really well, in my view, the ways in which he would distinguish the situations. But nonetheless, I understand that you're now making the argument that you're operating under that same general principle. But I don't think that means you have to abandon the view that the process that this committee and that the House is now engaged in on a regular basis of removing members from committees isn't a sustainable one for the House. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. And I'm happy to yield to the gentleman if he'd like, but it's not. I hear what you're saying. I hear the argument you're making.
Where was the concern last term then? If this is so detrimental, which I think it actually was detrimental to do this, where were you last year?
I hear you, and I'll get to that. Precisely why I referenced now Chairman Cole, from a ranking member, notwithstanding my belief that there are distinguishing factors to the former chairman, now ranking member McGovern. The ranking member chair thing's going to confuse us all. I'll call you chairman. Notwithstanding Mr. McGovern's really effective job at distinguishing the circumstances, I do concede that some of the warnings about the dangers were prescient, right, in terms of what you've articulated. I can say that and still say that this is a mistake. And I guess that's all I'm asking for. Maybe not my place to ask for it, but that's the reason that I articulate that. Now, all that being said, right, the majority is going to do what the majority wants to do. But I would implore my colleagues, spare us any reference to due process tomorrow, who I don't know who's managing the rule. I look to my colleague, Mr. Roy, and Mr. Massey, both of whom I know care a great deal about regular order and the rules of the House and this institution as a body. This resolution has no due process. I doubt, unless, I'll yield to Mr. Roy. I know we're going to tangle tomorrow in judiciary, but you're not, I will yield. You don't argue that this has due process, right? I understand if you support the resolution, but
this body doesn't really have due process. We just make political decisions, and we have to decide that. If we're going to decide to impeach somebody, decide to impeach somebody. Like this, it's just we're a group of people that have to come together and decide what the hell we're going to do, and that's what this is about.
I thank the gentleman, and I think you should manage the rule, because what you just said is very different than what Speaker McCarthy and apparently members who. I don't know if the chairman will assign you, but very different than what the speaker has said, and these press releases we're reading from members who 2 days ago were talking about how this would be violative of the principles undergirding this body in our constitutional republic, and there must be due process. We are passionate advocates for due process. Never mind, because this resolution has
would the gentleman yield?
Conceded. Of course I would.
I appreciate the fresh honesty here from Mr. Neguse. This is excellent, and I intend to reciprocate with some of this honesty. But to answer your question, which you asked Chip, and I would like, it has a vanishingly small amount, almost an infinitesimally small amount of latent due process. But that's more than the resolutions you all had. So, Eric.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman's honesty, and it is vanishingly small because I can't find it in the resolution. And if the chairman of the Ethics Committee, I'll finish up here, but I assume you agree with Mr. Massey and Mr. Roy, both distinguished members of your caucus and conference here, that this is not, there's no due process in the resolution.
There's an appellate process. There's not due process.
An appellate process? Where is the appellate process?
It says here, and I did not draft a resolution, this is not my resolution, whereas any member reserves the right to bring a case before the Committee on Ethics as grounds for an appeal to the Speaker of the House for reconsideration of any committee removal decision. That is language that is in the resolution.
Prefatory language that has no binding whatsoever in this body constitutes an appellate process to you?
Well, it does give, assuming that Ms. Omar is
What
removed
does
from
it
her
give? Where does
committees.
it say it gives anything?
It says that she has a right to file a complaint with the Ethics Committee. That's what's in the resolution.
I hear you. Well, in any event.
And I would agree that that's more that was in the resolution as it
hoping-
relates to Marjorie Taylor Greene, which contained none of that language.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm not, we don't have to go back rounds and rounds. I thank Mr. Roy and I thank Mr. Massey for what I think were honest answers. And, as far as and Mr. Reschenthaler, I didn't ask you about the due process, but I guess that's let's just be, let's really intellectually honest about it. And, Mr. Massey made a good point. So I'm not, who has a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm new here. Mr. Chairman, was due process afforded to Ms. Taylor Greene or Mr. Gosar in the last Congress?
Yeah, and I take the question. The point, and Mr. Massey made this point, and Mr. Reschenthaler did as well, that to the extent that you all are pointing back to a precedent that Ranking Member McGovern, I think, has articulated, there are distinguishing factors, but understanding that you all disagree with that contrast. Nonetheless, I don't remember members in our conference describing the resolutions that removed Mr. Gosar from his committees, by example, as being rife with ample due process. That was not an argument that was made. Maybe made by some members, certainly not one that I'm aware of.
So,
and that's simply my timer. But my point is, and I'll happy to go back to you for a colloquy. My point is that let's just not make the argument that this provides due process, because it doesn't. And Mr. Massey answered it honestly, as you said, vanishing. You had such a yeah, but much better way of describing it than I could come up with. So, I don't. It's intellectually honest to say that, and also you can make that argument that it has that vanishingly small, as Mr. Massey said, was more than perhaps in another resolution considered previously. If you want to make that argument, that's your argument to make.
So your argument is not that the majority, when you were in the majority, provided due process.
No,
your argument is that we shouldn't argue that this provides due process.
Yes, my argument is simple, that there are multiple members of your conference who made the argument that they would not support a resolution to remove Ms. Omar from a committee or any committees without due process. And in one moment, of course, Mr. Chairman. And my argument, or not my argument, I think it's been established as a fact during the course of this hearing, is that this resolution does not provide due process. So to the extent that members are now saying, you know what, I'm going to vote for this resolution because it has it, we've established on a bipartisan basis it doesn't. That's all I'm making the argument about. Or I'm sorry, as Mr. Massey said. Correct. So, and of course, I yield to the chairman.
Well, thank you. Just to make the point, many people that made that argument also said, but if you do this, this is the door you're going to open. So, yes, you can argue for process. You overruled those arguments. You made the decision that was not a valid argument, and you acted accordingly. Every member up here that was in the last Congress voted to remove Republican members from committee, and not from one committee, and not for specific cause, and in some cases for remarks that were made before they were members. That was your decision. But at the time, it was said, if you do this, you're opening this door. Well, the door's now open. You raise a fair point, my friend, about whether or not we should walk through that door. That's a fair point. But don't imply that people said, if you do this, there will be no consequence to doing it. Actually, that warning was made loud and clear, and here we are today. And I'm sad we're here, but we are here. Yield back to my friend.
I thank the chairman in salient points as always, and I would simply say, again, I'm just talking, I hear you, and I recognize the point you made. I think it's the same point that Mr. Reschenthaler made earlier. I'm just saying, as you characterize this resolution, let's just not talk about it as though it has due process if it doesn't. And and I think we've established it doesn't. So that's all I'm, the arguments as to whether or not it should or should not are divorced from the point that I'm making, which is simply, let's not say that it has due process when it doesn't. That's all I'm saying. And with that, I yield back.
Yield to my friend from Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say it has very small latent due process, and vanishingly small. But there is, but you have to understand that it may have been enough to get somebody's vote and to express a concern. And I've spoken with that person at great length. And by the way, if you were going to compel anybody on this side of the aisle to vote against this resolution, I would be that person. I am probably, let's talk, yeah. I'm probably the only one who's been removed from a committee who's sitting up here. Now, our majority did it in such a slick way, most of you didn't even realize it happened. When I was a freshman, I was named the chairman of the Technology Subcommittee on Science. That lasted about 12 weeks. Not only was my gavel taken away, I was no longer a member of that subcommittee. How did they achieve it? Actually, it might be a good idea here. They just dissolved the subcommittee. John Boehner told Lamar Smith, there's no way he can be chairman of that subcommittee, and Lamar did it in the kindest way he could. He just dissolved the subcommittee. He said, we're going to merge your subcommittee with the research subcommittee, and you can be, I'm embellishing here, the decorative vice chair. So anyways, I'm not a fan of doing this. This is partisan. This committee is the most partisan thing I've ever witnessed. It's 9-4, right? It is meant to be partisan. The only way to make this bipartisan is to kick people off both sides of the aisle off committees. That would be a truly bipartisan resolution that we're doing. I came in here thinking if the other side of the aisle would be somewhat repentant about what happened to Marjorie or what they did to Paul Gosar, that I could find charity in my heart for Ilhan Omar. I am seeing no reluctance whatsoever, no regret whatsoever from the other side of the aisle about taking that next step in the race to the bottom. A race that I feel like our side started because we did it to ourselves. Your innovation was to do it to us. And I think we taught you pretty well. It's like, because any case, if this resolution, if I could write the resolution, I would write it such that you all choose whether Ilhan remains on the committee or not. And I would do it by writing a resolution that says, whereas removing Marjorie Taylor Greene from her committee was wrong, whereas removing Paul Gosar from his committee was wrong, whereas neither action was taken with any due process, now therefore be it resolved, nobody shall be removed from a committee by their party or the other party without a unanimous vote of the Ethics Committee.
Is that an amendment?
Would you vote for it? I'm wondering, well, my question is if Ilhan would vote for that, I could probably vote to keep her on her committee. Because I do think it's a partisan exercise, and it pains me that we are at this point, and, I've struggled with it, but this is where we're at, and I don't think the other side of the aisle would take that step back with us and express regret or remorse for what they did. Ms. Wild?
Yes.
Can you tell me what Marjorie Taylor Greene, what it was that she did or said that got her removed from the committee? What was the reason given in the resolution that you voted for to take her off the committee?
I wish I had that good a memory, but I don't. If I had more time to get prepared for this, I might have also been able to come back to it, but I just don't know.
Let me tell you why you can't remember and why nobody here can remember the specific reason. There was given no specific reason. I'll read it. Hers is the shortest resolution you can imagine. Whereas Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene should be removed from her committee assignments in light of conduct she has exhibited. Now, therefore, be it resolved. There was no specific allegation.
May I just?
Please.
Interject? May I point out, Mr. Guest has kindly provided me with that resolution. That, again, what you just read, was in a whereas clause, which is not in any way binding. It doesn't provide due process.
No, it doesn't.
It might be nice by way of history when preparing a resolution to include more details so that.
Reclaiming my time, she was kicked off for no specific reason. None whatsoever. It is not in the resolution. I'm looking at it right now. When we, the right to do, there's even, not only was there not due process, there was not an allegation, a specific actionable allegation wasn't even in this. I suspect I know why. It's because this was unprecedented, and it was probably, as you might complain here tonight, for things that she did before she was in that term. But these were things. This happened on February 4th, 2021. So even though there's a vague reference to something she did with no specific allegation, we know that it had to do with something before she was ever elected. And my own personal feeling, if we weren't engaged in this partisan exercise, is that anybody on either side of the aisle, if you did something before your election that may have been unsavory but was legal, the voters are the ones who adjudicate that. There's 750,000 people in your congressional district that's where the due process is, frankly. And I believe, with full admission, that I'm engaged in what we're all engaged in right here tonight, which is a partisan exercise. You're on one side, I'm on the other. I believe that we really shouldn't be litigating things before somebody became a congressperson. I don't think it's the domain or the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee. But I think your side of the aisle may have felt the same thing at that point, and which is why there's no specific allegation in hers. So at least this resolution, which I'm sad we're at, the resolution to keep a certain person off of a committee, at least it's got some specificity and what the reason is.
The gentleman yield for a second?
I'll yield to you.
No, the gentleman keeps on talking about the purely partisan process, and I just want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the final vote in the House on the Marjorie Taylor Greene issue. It was a bipartisan vote. 11 Republicans joined with all the Democrats, so it wasn't a purely partisan thing. I just think the record should reflect that. And the same with Mr. Gosar as well.
Reclaiming my time,
Absolutely,
you're not sure how tomorrow's going to turn out, are you?
I have no idea how tomorrow's.
Okay. So to call it may be early to prejudge
No,
that this is partisan. You're right. This might be a bipartisan effort. I should retract my statement that it is partisan. There may be those of you on that side of the aisle that join us. I'll just close by pointing out that if I were to be persuaded tonight to not be partisan, it would have been by those on the other side of the aisle regretting that they had been partisan. And I don't see any remorse whatsoever, particularly in the person who's being judged here by the resolution. So that's ultimately, I spent a couple hours with our colleague, some of our colleagues who had the most heartburn over this resolution because they took a principled stand. But ultimately, I was going to let this resolve it for me. Does the other side agree with the principled people on this side of the aisle? And the answer is no, they don't even agree that we shouldn't be kicking people off committee. They think the criteria should be different. But when I go look at the criteria, there was no criteria for Marjorie Taylor Greene. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really want to begin by
following up with the ranking member from Ethics about the difference between opinion and action. But it also leads us, I think, to the difference between vengeance and consideration. And I think from what we've heard a little bit today is that this is about vengeance. This is about vindictiveness. This was going to happen to you, so we're doing it now. We're exercising that ability. But Representative Wild, could you just follow up? I know you also wanted to talk about some other matters. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the issue of what makes the difference of somebody saying we should go and engage in protest, engage in peaceful protest that might make somebody uncomfortable because we're calling out actions that they might not like, versus actually calling for violence against your colleagues?
Thank you for the question. My testimony here is largely intended to be directed to the process, not to the substance of anybody's remarks and whether or not it justifies removal. I did, however, make that comment about Representative Omar's statements being matters of opinion, similar to opinion that's uttered every single day here, and not improperly so, versus statements of action or incitement of action. But the reason I brought that up is because I was thinking about it in the context of the way the Ethics Committee works, which, by the way, I said it in my opening remarks, but the Ethics Committee is composed of an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. It is the only truly bipartisan committee on Capitol Hill. And we actually, Mr. Massey, I do want you to know, we do sometimes come to unanimous decisions in the Ethics Committee. We have on, not this Congress, of course we haven't met yet, but we have on a number of occasions come to unanimous decisions, which is, you can imagine, fairly unusual. And it's because we are being called upon to evaluate actions or conduct of members, and we weigh all of these kinds of considerations, which would include, getting back to what I was trying to say there, we would undoubtedly include a discussion of whether it was proper opinion that was stated, whether we disagreed or not, versus actions that were being encouraged or incited. And so that's why I brought that up. And I think it is just important to recognize that that is why the Ethics Committee has value in this place, because of the fact that we have an equal number. We actually, we don't always agree on everything by any means, but we try very, very hard to come to consensus. And that's one of the reasons I think that it is so important that this matter be allowed to proceed through the Ethics Committee's usual process, which I hope is also going to govern other matters that come up in this Congress that have been spoken of, reported in the press, that kind of thing. But I would hope we would do it that way, because that's why I believe this committee was set up the way that it was, to encourage. You can't win in the Ethics Committee unless you sway a member of the other party, So I just think that it makes it very unique, and I think it's also very important to preserve the integrity of the Ethics Committee, but also to preserve the integrity of this body so that we can't randomly do things on a partisan basis. I wish Mr. Massey were here to hear that, but that's why it was set up that way, and it's because we should not be taking harsh actions against members of Congress that are not done on a truly bipartisan basis.
So one of the issues that I think also came up is the fact of what does each party do? Like, I've co-sponsored a bill with Mr. Massey last Congress. This is the first time I've had interactions with him. I'm sorry he got removed from a committee by having them dissolve that committee, but clearly that was action that his caucus, his conference took. And that in our side, that we did, as you pointed out, raise, and there were consequences to Representative Omar for those statements. What worries me right here is that anti-Semitism is on the rise.
white nationalism is on the rise. And communities that I care for deeply, for whom, I feel the pain of what it feels like to have that anti-Semitic rhetoric, to have that hatred pointed at you every day, where there is a desire by some in this country to rather to rule by fear, to make people afraid of people who aren't like you, that othering is on the rise right now, and that we are using, in this instance, comments, anti-Semitic comments that were made, perhaps, and that for which she apologized, that we are now using that for this process. So in this moment of where we have said, this is, you're going to have it coming to you, because we had it again, that we are using statements that were made a while back that are wrong, and that we are perhaps minimizing the horror of anti-Semitism right now, the horror of white nationalism that's raising. And that's a concern for me as we go about this process. Because I think there is a distinction between comments where you're actually directing action, that it's actually about violence, it's about guns, it's about let's shoot, it is a different type of animal that we're talking about there. And that, I think, is also should be very concerning to us as we move forward on this, because we should all be universally condemning anti-Semitism. And it's, in regards to Mr. Massey, question about what was it, the resolution set out clause after clause after clause about what was it that Representative Green engaged in that was wrong and that led to that. And it wasn't stuff that just happened, as our ranking member pointed out. She continues to engage in that, where just a year ago, they spoke, both Representative Gosar and Representative Green, at a gathering of white nationalists in Florida. So if there was a concern about anti-Semitism, it would be applied more judiciously than we are proceeding right now. And with that, is there anything else that you'd like to? Okay, with that, I will
thank
yield
you.
back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I agree we shouldn't be here tonight. You know why? Ms. Pelosi should have taken care of this a long time ago. Ms. Pelosi should have taken care of this. She didn't do it with Ms. Omar. She didn't do it with Eric Swalwell, who compromised the security of this country by whatever he did with the lady that he did. Adam Schiff, all the lies he told with Russian collusion, and he was never held accountable. Ms. Pelosi should have taken care of this, and we would not be here. Now, the partisanship is real, and I'm glad we are two worlds apart with the two parties in this country. We are worlds apart. And we talked about socialism for 2 hours. What this administration is doing is leading this country into socialism by their actions, not by my words. And I went into, why would you go into leaving $80 billion to countries that hate us? Why would you buy oil from countries of 13 countries in OPEC that do not have our best interests? Why would you do that? So we're different, and I'm glad it's partisan, because I will tell you, it's a preview of coming attractions. If this type language is said by other members of your party, and quite frankly, if the Republican Party, we would take actions on that. I'm glad we are. Now, Ms. Wiles, it's interesting you said that it's just Ms. Omar's opinions. We've got 20 standing and doesn't lead to actions. You said it's just her opinion. The 20 committees in the House of Representatives takes action. And how you feel about different subjects results in actions. Let me just go over on the Foreign Relations Committee, which every member is supposed to be a proponent for the United States of America, not foreign countries. National security developments affecting foreign policy, that's an action. Strategic planning and agreements, that's an action. War powers, treaties, executive agreements, that's an action. arms control and disarmament issues. That's an action. I mean, I could go down the list, but what Ms. Omar has said, I mean, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but what caught my attention long before now, that 9/11 was, some people did something. That's an insult to every American in this country, particularly the 3,000 people who died, who will never go home to their families, who will never participate in a football celebration or golf celebration. I resent that. That does tell her opinions, which result in actions. Israel, our greatest ally, is an apartheid state. She equated the United States and Israel with Hamas and the Taliban. I mean, this is inexcusable. And yes, I'm all in favor of this. And again, if other members take her opinion, which she represents 750,000 people, but our voice is magnified through social media all over America, 330 million people. I'm offended by what she did, and I gladly support this. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Appreciate the chairman. I do associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from Kentucky, but also the gentleman from South Carolina, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the gentlelady, all the remarks that we've been talking about over here. And I appreciate the spirit of the remarks from the gentleman from Colorado. And would note that we're here for a very obvious reason. The door was opened, and now we're dealing with that. And the door shouldn't have been opened. I'm reminded when I was in the Senate Judiciary Committee in 2005, and Miguel Estrada was being filibustered by the Democrat majority at the time. And we know why. We know this because a memo that said very specifically that he was being filibustered because he was an Hispanic conservative was found, but then shoved aside. We couldn't talk about it because it was found on a server, and they said, we shouldn't get it. There's a whole lot of backstory on that. But there was a lot of drama around that. There were 7 judges being held up: Priscilla Owen, Janice Rogers Brown, because she's black. That was all happening. We just sweep that aside. And you fast forward, and Bill Frist was being pressured to deploy the nuclear option. I remember being part of all those conversations, the Senate lawyer and the Judiciary Committee. Bill Frist decided not to deploy the nuclear option. In 2013, Harry Reid did deploy the nuclear option. 2017, then certain things changed at the United States Supreme Court. So now we live in that world. It is what it is. Now here we sit. The door was opened. I just went back and reread my speech on the floor because the gentleman, I hadn't done that yet. I went back and reread my speech on the floor. Not stand by every word of that speech. And in it, I referenced the fact that I just a few months prior had been in agreement with some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle with respect to January 6th, which there's disagreements on our side of the aisle on some of that with respect to the votes at the time. And that I'd taken very strong disagreement and sought apology from our colleague on our side of the aisle about some of the remarks that were said, but felt that this was not the right path to go down. I stand by that. So here we sit. I could associate myself and do with all the remarks of the gentleman from South Carolina. I have very strong disagreement with a lot of the statements that Representative Omar has made. We've covered most of them. That some people did something is the one that really sticks in my craw pretty strongly. Raises a whole lot of flags for me. I think there are significant amount of justifications to raise issues with respect to service on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but I would not go down this road. But I'm also reminded, in August of 1993, Juan Gonzalez was a batter for the Texas Rangers and was plunked by Alex Fernandez from the White Sox. And just a little bit later, Robin Ventura came to the plate for the White Sox, and Nolan Ryan was on the mound. And Robin knew what was about to happen. Nolan plunked him. And then Robin Ventura charged the mound, and then Nolan Ryan beat the crud out of him on the mound. That's what happened. We all know that's what happened. Old school baseball. Nolan Ryan defined old school baseball. This is raw politics. That's what this is. When the doors opened, then there's a question, and you have to decide what you're going to do. We're not going to unilaterally disarm. Just not going to do it. I'm tired of that. It just is what it is. Guys took a shot at someone on our team, about statements I disagreed with and took very much to task. But I've got strong disagreements with Representative Omar. I would prefer, if it were just starting from scratch, I would not choose this path. I'd just say whatever stuff you all want to say. We'll say whatever stuff we want to say. Our manager pick our team. Let's go battle it out in committee. That's what I would say. I would say that's the right place to be. But at this point in time, it is my considered judgment that, like Nolan Ryan, we've got to respond. And I'm just going to be blunt and honest about it. That's just my belief. I think it's important. And I hope we'll get through this. We'll kind of hip check each other. Maybe we can sit down and figure out by the end of this Congress, next Congress, whoever's in charge, we figure out how we're going to play ball going forward and set those rules. And I would say the same thing about open rules, closed rules, structured rules. And the ranking member could scoff. We've had X number of votes. We'll have continued debate about this stuff over time. There will be closed rules. There will be structured rules. There will be open rules. I'd like to have that debate. I'd like to have the considered judgment of the ranking member on that, and as I have debate on my side of the aisle. I'm just saying that we can figure out how to protect this institution and try to decide how to do things the right way. But in this instance, I'm going to be very open and honest about why I'm going to vote for this resolution. That's why. Again, recognizing the statements that the representative has made, I find to be highly problematic, extremely concerning, raising very serious questions from a foreign affairs perspective, as the ranking member has raised about statements made and how he feels about people being on certain committees over here.
Gentlemen,
I think we should, in my opinion, we should withdraw from that battle going forward and then let each manager pick their team. And I'll be glad to yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
And I would simply say I appreciate Mr. Roy's honesty. I mean, and again, kind of similar to what Mr. Massey said previously, and not to belabor the point, because I think you've already conceded this, but why not emulate the same resolution that was used in the past as opposed to calling this something that it is not in terms of the due process language? That's the part that I just didn't understand, because if it doesn't provide due process, why? So, as you said, it's partisan. It's not. And again, I appreciate the honesty on that front, and obviously the past presidents that you cited and the rest. But
I would. I don't want to interrupt.
No.
Yeah, I would just say, agreeing with the gentleman from Kentucky, putting something in the whereas clauses, outlining I think, genuine statement by the speaker on our side or whatever, saying that would be taken into consideration and viewed is something. It is something. It is not, I will be very clear, due process in the way we mean it in court. This is not a court. This is not due process in that sense. The question here is what we're going to do as members to afford each other the opportunity to speak, be heard. I'm much more in the favor of let each other speak and be heard, and then go use your First Amendment rights to go say why you think that person said something crazy or disagreeable. I would prefer to be in that space. I have no problem with that language being in the whereas clauses. I'm not going to go trumpet it as some grand amount of due process. It's something. It's something in there, and I'd hang my hat on it and say, yeah, go argue the ethics and make the claim. But that's not what this is about. I mean, let's just be clear. Ryan flunked Ventura for a reason. And I yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to argue that this is not partisan, but I am going to argue that it's less partisan than the treatment of our members by the majority, the Democrat majority at the time. I'd like to ask Ms. Wild, did did Ms. Taylor Greene or Mr. Gosar get brought before the Ethics Committee before they were removed from all of their committees?
No, I don't, no,
Okay.
not on
thank-
those matters.
Thank you. Was it wrong then to remove them? You're arguing that, that we should take Ms. Omar before the Ethics Committee rather than doing this by resolution, even though that was the process that was handled in the previous Congress to Ms. Taylor Greene and Mr. Gosar. Was it wrong to remove Ms. Taylor Greene and Mr. Gosar from their committees by the Democrat majority without going through ethics and doing that by resolution, in your opinion?
Let me just say, I would have some, I do have some problems with the process that was followed, but I would also, again, point out that the difference in comments between Ms. Omar and her opinions about Israel in general, 9/11 and so forth, are a lot different than a member who makes statements that to incite violence. So I guess that's a 50-50 answer. I didn't love the process, but I also think this is a distinct situation.
And just to be clear, the comments made by Ms. Omar were made when she was a member of Congress, and the comments made by Ms. Taylor Greene was when she was not a member of Congress. Is that correct?
I think there's some of each for both of them. I think, and I can't tell you which statements exactly, but I think both of them made some statements before they came to Congress and some statements while they were in Congress, of the ones that have been referenced tonight.
Do you believe that Ms. Taylor Greene and Mr. Gosar were afforded due process?
Can I see the resolution again, Mr. Guest? Mr. Guest was kind enough, he has the one at least on Ms. Taylor Greene. I don't know if you have the one on. I would have to say, no, I don't think they were afforded due process, or at least Ms. Taylor Greene. And now I'm looking at the one for Mr. Gosar, because the statements I made before about whereas clauses not being included as binding material, the resolution on Marjorie Taylor Greene is considerably different than the one on Mr. Gosar in terms of the resolved section. And so I can't put them in the same category. But as I said before, I don't think that it was the correct process. And I think that we should all be looking forward in the 118th to how we're going to do things better rather than continuing things into perpetuity. Every time we shift the majority, we're, under this, if we don't follow the process that has been part of this body, i.e. the Ethics Standing Committee since 1967, then we're just going to be doing this every couple of years or whenever the majority shifts.
Ms. Wild, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you were not the chairman of the Ethics Committee during that time, and you may have advised your Democratic caucus or conference otherwise in that process. Mr. Guest, I want to thank you for your presentation. I know this is not your issue, and I appreciate your time here before this committee. This is not a one-to-one here, in my opinion, because Ms. Omar is not being removed from all committees. She's being removed in this resolution from participation on a specific committee that requires high security clearance and other factors, in contrast to what the Democrat majority did to Ms. Taylor Greene and Mr. Gosar, which was completely remove them from all committees without due process. Do you believe this is a one-to-one with those circumstances in what we're dealing with today?
I do not, and I agree with your assessment that it's very different in the fact that this resolution is very narrowly tailored just to remove Ms. Omar from a single committee, which is Foreign Affairs. Many of her statements, if not all, relate to statements that she made of people of Jewish descent, and those are issues that are taken up by the Foreign Affairs Committee. If you remember back historically, with Marjorie Taylor Greene, originally the issue was that she made statements regarding a prior school shooting that she was on at that time, Ed in Labor, think it's now referred to as Ed and Workforce. At that time, Leader McCarthy went to Speaker Pelosi, said that he would remove her from that committee, but since her statements were based toward educational shooting, that was not accepted by the Speaker, so the resolution went forward, removing her from all committees. As it relates to Mr. Gosar, very similar. He was originally brought, there was a motion brought, or a resolution brought to remove him from oversight. That was the only committee listed in that specific resolution. Once that came to rules, there was a manager's amendment which then removed him from natural resources, which was his additional committee. And so we've seen that, in my opinion, what is being sought here in this resolution, again, is much more narrowly tailored to a specific committee. And I don't believe that you can, as you said, I don't believe it's one-to-one. I think that this resolution is different than the one we saw against both Ms. Green and Mr. Gosar.
And just to be clear, Ms. Omar, if we pass this resolution, will be able to serve on other committees.
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just want to close by saying I don't think this is not a similar issue, but I do want to concur with our chairman, Mr. Cole, that door was opened and the precedent was already set. We are following a much less partisan process, even though we have heard remarks on this side of the dais that it is partisan. It is certainly, in my opinion, as a new person to this Congress, we are approaching it in a more, with a more timid approach, even though we are taking this action and it is a firm action. We're not saying she can't serve on any committees. We're just saying she can't serve on this particular committee, and I yield back.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Well, I thank the witnesses very much for your testimony here. As a statewide political leader in New York, I've spent a great deal of time with NYPD officers, surviving family members on 9/11, FDNY, people that face loss on that day that, our families can't imagine. And I think back to probably the last moment in our history that truly, really united this Congress was out on the steps of this building on that day. The members of Congress of both sides came together and saying, "God bless America." And a lot has been talked about due process here, and I think we've covered all of that. So I'm not going to go there. This member, when they are removed from this committee, will have the opportunity to go to the Ethics Committee, and I wish you very well with that endeavor that you'll undoubtedly face down the road. But we face the question, and we have to go back to our constituents, about a member that has, demonstrated themselves as an anti-Semite, period, hard stop, and as someone that has been a denier of the atrocities of 9/11. And the fact that this member would serve on our Foreign Affairs Committee to represent this country on the world stage, I think is unconscionable. And I think this action is warranted. And I think you're going to be surprised with how many bipartisan votes are cast for this resolution tomorrow. So with that, I yield back.
I appreciate the manner in which both of you conducted yourself, and you're excused.
Thank you so much.
Is there anyone else seeking to testify on House Resolution 767? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion of our hearing. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H-Con Res 9 denouncing the horrors of socialism a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services or their designee. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the concurrent resolution. The rule provides that the concurrent resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the concurrent resolution. The rule further provides for consideration of H-Res 76, removing a certain member from a certain standing committee of the House under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ethics or their designee. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution. The rule provides that the resolution shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule waives all points of order against provisions in the resolution. Yield back.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of amendments.
Distinguished ranking members recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move that instead of providing for consideration of H-Res 76, the rule provide for separate consideration of H-Res 72 and H-Res 789 as adopted by the House on a bipartisan basis in the 117th Congress, amended to reflect the current committee assignments. H-Res 72 remove Representative Green from her committee due to statements in association with statements advocating for violence against the former Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. H-Res 789 removed Representative Gosar from his committees after he posted a video depicting himself killing Representative Ocasio-Cortez. These are clear examples of members who should not be serving on committees. Representative Omar has not advocated for violence against her fellow members of Congress. She has apologized for her remarks she's made. By the way, she never denied that September 11th happened. And for those who have or didn't like the comments that she made that I would say were taken out of context, let me quote what Marjorie Taylor Greene said about September 11th. And I quote, "We had witnessed 9/11, the terrorist attack in New York, and the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, and the so-called plane that crashed into the Pentagon. It's odd there's never any evidence shown for a plane in the Pentagon." I mean, come on. And yet there's no reaction. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Ask for roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the tally.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The motion is not
I have
agreed to.
another amendment, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the rule additionally provide for separate consideration of H-Res 72 and H-Res 789 as adopted by the House on a bipartisan basis in the 117th Congress, amended to reflect current committee assignments. If my colleagues are determined to have the House vote on whether Representative Omar can serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, at least let the House also vote on whether Representative Gosar and Representative Green deserve to serve on their committees. Again, I remind my colleagues of the recent statements that Representative Green has made, not only with regard to January 6th, but with regard to other things, that she is being placed on the Homeland Security Committee, I think should concern us all, and I would urge my colleagues to support this.
Is there any debate and discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, ask all those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the nays
Ask
have
for roll
it.
call on that, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call has been requested.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Ms. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Ms. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the tally.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Motion's not agreed to. Are there any additional amendments? Yes, Mr. Chairman. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. I move that the committee make in order amendment number 3 to H-Con Res 9, which was offered by Representative Gottheimer. This amendment would add language to the resolution that fascism led to the mass murder of 6 million Jewish people by the Nazi regime. That's it.
Any debate or discussion on the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I would request a roll call vote.
Roll call has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Ms. Fishbach. Ms. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye, sorry.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the tally.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Motion's not agreed to. Any additional amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 2 to H. Con Res 9, offered by Representative Takano, which would clarify that any opposition to socialist policy implementation in the United States does not include existing federal programs such as Medicare, Social Security, TRICARE, VA healthcare, the VA home loan program, VA burial benefits, and VA homelessness programs. I would say that we need to make sure, especially after the discussion here today, that in passing this legislation, that we are standing to make sure that we are not going to be attacking Social Security, Medicare, and other important benefits that Americans depend on. We want to make sure that that is not the intent of this resolution, so that we do not worry about that as we go to make our votes tomorrow. But we need to make sure that when they say socialist policies, it is not including Medicare, or is it? If it's not, then we can say it's not. And we, as Democrats, want to make sure that we are always protecting Social Security, Medicare, our VA benefits, and what we have been doing in the last 2 Congresses to actually say, not just thank you for your service to our veterans, but actually making a difference by providing them their services. And that's what Congressman Takano's amendment seeks to do.
Is there any debate or discussion on the gentlelady's resolution? Gentleman from Texas recognized.
I need to point out again, it was in the last 2 years that there have been repeated cuts to Medicare. You ask any doctor back home in your district if they've suffered cuts in Medicare over the past 2 years, the answer will be yes. The inflation, the American Rescue Plan was partially offset, partially paid for by a sequester placed on Medicare payments. The Inflation Reduction Act cut $300 billion from Medicare. And for what? To increase the subsidies going to insurance companies. Please spare me your tears about this. You had a chance to act in the last Congress. You did not.
We'll put you down as undecided.
Yes.
Is there any additional discussion or debate on the measure? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 All those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the nays have it.
Recorded vote?
I would like a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
Recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the tally.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
Motion is not agreed to. Are there any additional motions or amendments?
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to digest the fact that the majority of this committee voted against adding to this resolution language that all it said was that fascism led to the mass murder of 6 million Jewish people by the Nazi regime. I just don't understand why that would be controversial, but I just want to state that for the record.
Well, gentleman's always has insightful comments. I think the majority just decided it wasn't relevant to the motion. With that, we'll move on to vote on the motion itself. Hearing no request for further amendments, the question is on the motion to report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
As for recorded vote, Mr. Chairman?
A recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. No. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. No. Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Leisure Fernandez. No. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the tally.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
Motion has been agreed to. A gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Reschenthal, will handle for the majority.
And I'm going to handle it for the minority.
A great matchup on the floor. So I'm sure televisions all across America will be tuning in. With that, I want to thank everybody on the committee on both sides of the aisle. I know this has been a difficult and contentious day. While we don't always agree on things, I have to tell you I'm proud of each and every member of this committee for the manner in which they handled themselves, the points in which they made, and hopefully we'll go on and continue to do this and follow the example my good friend, the ranking member, set many, many times over the years. So thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you.